There we are. And let one more person in. Hang on one second. Fabulous. Everyone, welcome. We have some 24, I think, people just now coming in, and they're still coming in. So it's a great pleasure to have you all join us on this Sunday evening. Again, if you don't know me, if you're coming from outside the St. Timothy's orbit, I am Steve Rice. I'm the rector of St. Timothy's in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Very pleased to have on this Zoom tonight, which I hope will be the first of many Zooms of this nature, not just with these fine priests, but with other priests to come. I'm not sure where they are on your screen. He's in the top right. If this were the Brady Bunch, this would be Marcia, I guess, at the top right, Father Trey Garland, and then at the bottom, where Alice would be, is Father Justin Lanier. So we're thrilled to have them here. Let me add two more people into the Zoom. All right. Why don't we do this? Father Trey, why don't you just give us a brief bio of where you are in ministry, and then I'm going to ask you both something else about your background that makes your experience or interest pertinent to this conversation. So just a brief bio, who you are, where you're serving, all that good stuff.
I'm Father Trey Garland. I am rector of St. Paul's Church by the Lake in Chicago, Illinois, in Rogers Park. And I come here both as someone who luckily served as a supply for Father Steve, and I'm the one of the exorcists for the Diocese of Chicago.
Thank you. Father Justin.
I'm Father Justin Lanier. I serve as an associate at St. Clement's in Philadelphia. I have a background in contemplative monasticism with the Trappists and some kind of cross training with the Rinzai Zen Buddhists, particularly at Tofukuji in Kyoto, Japan. Yeah, and then whatever you want me to get into, we'll get into.
Now, were you ever ordained as a Roman Catholic priest?
Never.
Never. Were you?
No.
But you were in the Roman Catholic Church and was a monk? I'm
Yes.
always a bit confused by this. Okay.
Yeah. It's confusing because when I was in order to take the habit, you had to be without any financial obligations. And I had student loans. But the monastery I was in was like unbelievably open. So, so I was there for years while having student loans. But you could go through formation, but you couldn't go through. You couldn't like get minted. And they didn't have a way for that until after I had gone. And so I used to be able to go back for like 3 months or 6 months just to what I would call train. And I go right back into choir and go into my old cell, and had a really just lovely time with them. And they're the ones who sent me to study in Japan at the Rinzai Zen Monastery.
Well, and you not that you didn't mention, but well, you didn't mention, but you studied under Thomas Keating, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was my spiritual director. Yeah, from 96 until when he died in 2018. And then I had years with him in the monastery. So centering prayer was a particularly central practice. It still is in my vocation. And so when I came to this whole topic, I also came from an ascetic, contemplative theological space. And yeah, so this kind of middle wavelength, we usually didn't really mess with. It wasn't until parish ministry when people started asking, like, hey, I've got these issues. And then I had to, study to try to, offer pastoral care in a general sense. And yeah, and we can get into that too.
Yeah. So what's interesting about the two of you is that you're both priests in the Episcopal Church, but with a time in the Roman Catholic Church as well. So you've had fingers or you've crossed several rivers, spiritually speaking, the Tiber, the Thames, and back, which gives you added depth, I think, to the experience. Because when we talk about the topic at hand, which tonight is about loosely paranormal, demonic, ghosts, all the things that might be on our mind because of Halloween coming in a couple of days, and that's just the cultural celebration as it is. We almost always associate those kinds of issues, especially exorcism, with the Roman Catholic Church. Every year around this time, there's some great, awful Hollywood movie about exorcism. I think The Pope's Exorcist is the most recent one that I saw on the plane coming back from Texas today. And so that's just what happens. But you have experience both in the Anglican Communion and in the Roman Catholic Church. So that's a helpful detail to that. So the first question is, tell me something, and Father Justin, we'll start with you. Tell me something about your background that brings some level of experience or expertise to tonight's topic of ghosts, paranormal, exorcisms, whatever we want to put under that umbrella. Tell me something about your background.
Okay, so generally in the contemplative tradition, particularly in contemplative monasticism, you're mostly focused on non-conceptual prayer, and then everything kind of comes out of this non-conceptual prayer, this kind of surrender of being. So you really don't, like John of the Cross says, if the Blessed Virgin comes in while you're in prayer, you simply let her come in and you let her move on. You don't get involved. You don't bow down. You don't no hyperdulia. You let her roll. So the whole, what I considered middle wavelength of the kind of, hierarchy of being, so to speak, we just kind of cut right through. And of course, in the context of contemplative prayer, you have all sorts of psychic phenomena, all sorts of visions, all sorts of different states, positive and negative, of consciousness, and you treat them all virtually like Teresa of Avila said, like the ravings of a madman. You just let them go by without engaging whatsoever, because you're really focused on just being on the cross. So, which is what, so that's how I was coming from a ascetic and mystical, contemplative, theological strain. And then I was in a parish, my first parish, and people were having things happen in their house, and they asked me to look into it. I think when I was in Vermont, it became more important, because not only did I have a lot of people come asking to be discerned as candidates for exorcism, and the Roman Church did too. Like, I don't know what was in the mountains there, but like lots of folks would come out of the woodwork. But the church had a lot of unusual, uncanny phenomena, lights, dancing, and giggling, and then also some really negative creatures. And and basically I had to learn on the job, like, how to take care of this space, how to take care of this land, how to take care of these people. And I recognized that there was something uncanny about the land. And so I worked with a few. I worked both with Anglican exorcists, also some dowsers. The dowsers would show up at my parish all the time with the little rods, and they would be tracking things, and they would ask to come into the parish and just observe. And also I would have self-proclaimed psychics show up and ask, like, hey, can I take a look at the inside of this place? There's something going on. And they kept going to the same couple places. And then we had some strange things go on in the basement. And I would go down and bless it, but we would use holy salt, holy water, Kyries. But it was clear that I needed more attention and more formation. And so, over my time there, I learned from as many people as I could. Yeah. And well, whenever we get into stories, we can get into some of the particulars. But I suppose from my experience, contemplatives aren't generally engaged in exorcism or what I would call like middle wavelength kind of practice like this. And when I would talk to Father Thomas about it, his approach was generally, you focus on contemplation and the kind of the non-conceptual approach. And then when you have a solid foundation in non-conceptual contemplative prayer, then you can backtrack and work with some of the subtle energies. But only once, you're, 2 or 3 decades into contemplative prayer before you start to, work with uncanny phenomena is the term that we mostly used.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll stop there because I can go on for.
There's a lot I want to come back to, and I wasn't at Mass at St. Timothy's today. I was traveling, but certainly I understand we had a lot of light flickering today in church, which could be explained. But I want to come back to uncanny phenomenon later, because that's a wonderful way, I think, that sums up the experience of many. Father Trey.
I do not have an ascetic background by any stretch of the imagination. I came into it, however, kind of like Father Justin. My first rectorship was in Greenville, South Carolina, and I had a family call me several times saying that stuff was going on in their house. And I'm sure you two, Father Steve and Father Justin, would agree with me. The Episcopal Church our seminaries just don't really teach us how to handle actual pastoral situations. And the good news is, neither does the Roman Catholic Church. They forgot how to do that. So that kind of started the foray for me into kind of dealing with this and having to call people and say, what do you normally do? And from there, it's just kind of been one little thing after another that's kind of kept me on this path and doing it. And in 2019, I was invited to go as a participant to the class on exorcism and liberation prayer in Rome for 2020. And of course, we all know what happened in 2020, which made that not possible for me to attend. So I was finally able to go this year, and committed to my bishop that I would take up this ministry, and have been talking with both Roman Catholic exorcist, Anglican exorcist, and trying to get the basis of a good foundation of this ministry. I don't have quite the experience that Father Justin has, but mine has just kind of been what you normally see in standard parish ministry of people and things that seem to defy scientific explanation.
Yeah, mine's the same, for full disclosure. Just parochial, parish, uncanny experiences, uncanny phenomenon, sounds, noises in homes and churches, individuals who seem to be oppressed with certain images or thoughts, or even a string of bad luck. I've only called the bishop once to explore a candidate, but never came to any kind of conclusion where the bishop's intervention was required. And I think if we have time, we'll get into what might be some of the triage applications that one does to say, is this a spiritual matter, or is this bad pasta salad from the night before, to how to determine what is demonic activity or whatever the case may be, and when it's not. Father Trey, I know it's custom. I'm not sure if it's in any canon law that I'm aware of. Do you know? I know Church of England, typically every diocese has an exorcist, or they may call them deliverance ministers. Is it more custom in the Episcopal Church for a diocese to have it, or some do and some don't?
It's my understanding, and just from talking from other Episcopal exorcists, that some do and some don't. The only really thing that we have written down at all is in the Book of Occasional Services, that little half
2
paragraph.
Yeah,
right, paragraph and a half. If you find yourselves in need of this ministry, call the bishop, and then the bishop is supposed to appoint an exorcist for every diocese. Now we don't, which isn't that surprising. But what I did find surprising, and talking to my colleagues in Rome, is there are a lot of Roman Catholic dioceses, both in Europe and the United States and North America, that do not appoint. They just want to appoint exorcists. So you can't really pin this on it's an Episcopal thing and not appointing it. Unfortunately, it's all over.
I actually appreciate the reticence the Episcopal Church has in pushing all those resources out, because you're right, this was not touched on in seminary, and based on a lot of seminarians, that might be a very, very good thing, that you just don't hand out the Roman ritual or whatever resource you want to use and say, go out and start doing harm to people and their lives. So that's one thing, that reluctance to push it and to have that Episcopal discernment theoretically is a very, very good idea, which I'm pleased it's there. Good. Thank you for that. So let's go into this, and now, Father Trey, I'll start with you, because I think you have some terms you'd like to define. So the second of my questions is, in talking about these things, what do Christians normally get wrong about things that are, to give a broad term, things that might be called unseen? And from that unseen category, and you may correct me in a moment, I might have a subcategory of paranormal, uncanny phenomenon, as Father Justin says, or demonic. So we all have our imagination. We've all watched a scary movie. We all have a story to tell, either in our grandma's house on the farm, or in our own home, or whatever the case may be. But typically, in terms of a theoretical standpoint of just theology, but also in practicality, what things do Christians normally get wrong about this subject?
For me, there are a few things. Probably using terminology is, whenever you have a manifestation, these uncanny events, whenever you have a manifestation, we typically classify it as, if it's certainly evil or malicious, it's considered preternatural, not supernatural. And this simply denotes that it is a manifestation that is malicious at worst, or kind of nondescript at best, but we don't attribute it the appellation of supernatural. So anything that's supernatural, we attribute only to God and to the angels and to the saints. The second thing that I think there's this huge misconception, at least I had it before I really started studying, is that the demonic, at least, and I can't really speak for general paranormal stuff, but the demonic is not considered chaotic. In fact, the demonic is very legalistic, which is why it's always important for a priest to be appointed by the bishop to perform the exorcism, because the demons will very much ask, by whose authority are you doing this? And if you can't answer correctly, the priest and the possessed are then kind of both in danger. Just to get one other term in for the church, speaking just as exorcisms, an exorcism is not a sacrament. It is a sacramental. And the chief difference is that any sacrament itself will give you God's grace. It's a vehicle of God's grace. Whereas sacramental, the person has to be disposed to receiving that grace. So you can't force an exorcism on somebody that doesn't want it. And there has to be a modicum of belief, just like we always say that we teach rather that if someone needs an exorcist or an exorcism performed, they need to be going to mass weekly, if not more than once a week. There has to be that component of faith involved in it. So it's a sacramental, not a sacrament. And finally, it's kind of been alluded to, but let me be really explicit. Lay people and priests in general should not should not use the prayers of exorcism by any stretch of the imagination. If you start using the words I adjure, I command, whatever, anything, you're putting yourself in danger. Do not do it. There are what we call minor prayers of exorcism and minor exorcisms and prayers of deliverance, which ask Jesus or God or the Holy Spirit to do the actions, and that's fine. Anyone can pray the prayers of deliverance, but it's kind of one of those things that they really kind of push into boldly, kind of like church insurance, is to make sure that unless you're authorized to use the major form of exorcism, don't. You'll get yourself in trouble.
Just for a second, say more about that. Is the best analogy? You don't, if you have no experience with a firearm, you don't go to the gun store and buy a revolver and then put it on your waist and then walk around in a seedy neighborhood because someone's going to take it from you and then kill you with it because you're not trained. You don't know what you're doing with it. Is that the best analogy to give a concrete world example, or what would you use that's better?
I mean, that's probably as good as anything I could come up with on the fly. It's just that you have to understand that intention, the intention of the heart and the intention of the soul is pretty explicit in these things. And one of the absolute requirements for any exorcist team is to do auricular one-on-one confession before you perform the exorcism. Because if you have any sin hanging on, they're going to target that. And so unless you really have been trained and you know what you're doing, and more importantly, you have, well, not probably on equal par, have been appointed an exorcist, because an exorcism is performed by a priest or a bishop, but it's done on behalf of the church. So it's not you, the priest, doing the exorcism. It is the church doing the exorcism through you. You simply are the vehicle, like we are for consecrating Holy Eucharist. And so unless you have that faculty given to you by your bishop, it's not going to do anything. And that's when it can really start to fall apart real quick.
Father Justin, you're nodding your head. So if you want to comment on that and then add your own, what things do Christians normally get wrong about this topic?
First off, that was great. That was so great. It makes so I think one of the interesting things with ritual, particularly, I think about like when we make holy water. The only time I would use I abjure is really with salt and then with the water before blessing. You exercise them first and then you bless. But as Father Terry made such a good point of, like, when you do the abjuring of the salt, you have your beretta on, you have your hat on, because you're standing in persona ecclesia. You are doing this in the name of the church. So you have your hat on. And when it's time to pray, you take your hat off. Same thing like when you do chalk and any of the old blessings that have the exorcism, then the blessing. And then, of course, when you're in the confessional, when you give the absolution, you have the hat on, because it's not the individual person. It's in persona ecclesia, in persona Christi. You're in the person of the church when you pardon and absolve. So It's so I find it so helpful to also like recognize the ritual aspects and to make sure that they're linked together. You're not just wearing the hat because because it looks funny. You know, you're wearing the hat because it stands for something and you are embodying something. So when you take it off to pray, it's a different orientation. When you're focused on the salt, you have it on, you are in the person of the church. I think that is so helpful to recognize manual act, intention, and really orientation.
And for our participants, the wearing the biretta can be a sign of judgment, in the sense that you're pronouncing judgment of absolution, where in the secular example or the analog will be, I think in the UK, judges might put on the black hat to pronounce, at least they used to, for the death penalty. Whereas obviously in the confessional, you're not pronouncing death, you're pronouncing life. And that is your role as sort of the of in persona ecclesia. Yeah, continue, please.
So I mean, that just those connections are, I think, so helpful. One of the things that this is kind of on a lighter note, but one of the things that I think folks sometimes get wrong is when people go fairy hunting. And of course, in Vermont, you know, I've got two little girls, and the little girls were all, everywhere, were all about fairies. And, you know, these are creatures that generally don't want to be messed with. They don't want you hanging out in their space. They don't want you, they don't want you trying to get involved in what they're up to. They're just happy doing their own thing. So they can also cause a ruckus. So generally I find them to be relatively neutral, unless you're getting in their business. And then they can become mischievous. Yeah, and my parish in Vermont had a, dare I say, community of the good people, a community of light beings that mostly didn't show, but over the course of 100 and some years would show up from time to time. And and there were people who had been there for families had been there for generations, and they would say, oh yeah, do you remember when the so-and-so and the 5 of them came out and they were all spinning around giggling, and then went through the door and went in and spun around? Oh yeah. So, and also it wasn't, and this was just a neutral, I would say this is a kind of a neutral experience, an uncanny phenomena, because in my understanding, in that middle register, there are a plethora of diverse creatures, more diverse than we really give credit for. Like, God clearly loves diversity. So there's this whole kind of spectrum of creatures. That are,
We'll talk about your parish in Vermont, because you and I had a long conversation about we were talking about things, nothing in particular, and you and I started sharing stories about uncanny phenomenon. And so I think what you said, your experience in your parish previously, is really interesting and may have some resonance. So tell us the story of what you had to deal with and how you dealt with it, and what you learned from it.
All right. So I was at the parish for about 7 years. So I should say I oftentimes like to drink from the fire hose. So I went up and I did my interview for the parish when I was seeing about deploying there. And, the room that they had set for us was all moldy. So they gave us another room, and the grocery store that was supposed to be, in walking distance had closed down, and the cafe next to it was also closed. And on the way back, we spent, we got caught up in Dulles Airport for 3 days, and my oldest daughter was just born, and she was sick with a fever, and she had febrile seizures. There was all sorts of signs like this will be a hard place to be in. And I was like, but I feel called here. Now, when I got there, within the first 6 months, there was all kinds of stuff. There was all kind of interpersonal stuff that was wonky. There was, and also like, when I would go down in the basement, first time around, I was like, this something is peculiar down here. I'd open it, and it's dirt floor. And I'd go down there, and the first time I'm down there, I'm walking around, just checking out the lay of the land, and I go to the far end, where there's it's hollow steps that go into the narthex upstairs. So I'm underneath of the hollow steps, and in front of this hollowed out step, there are all of these boards, like crisscrossed in front with nails like sticking up. It looked like a battlefront. And also like that end of that was, you could feel like cold and ominous. And I was like, whoa, this is peculiar. So I moved the boards, and I asked my sexton, I was like, hey man, what's going on with these boards? He's like, I don't know. I was like, did you put them there? He's like, I didn't put them there. So I move them all. And I'm down there the next week. Boards, different boards, but they're all crossed and I got nails coming out of them. I'm like, dude, why are you putting these boards here? This is a terrible place for boards, first off. And he's like, I'm not putting these boards here. Well, every time I went down there were boards there with nails in them. So I was like, all right, something is peculiar. And folks who, I had a lot of like old boiler men in the parish, and they all had stories of things down there. So there was this other section, oddly enough, where they used to do the youth group. I opened the door, and on the inside of the door is a giant sign that says, keep out. And then next to it, it says prison. And part of me is like, who puts this in a youth group room? There's a single chair in the middle. It feels like a torture chamber. Also, they had all the windows blocked out down in the basement to keep the heat in. And the first thing I do is, all right, you got to get light in here first off. Like, you got to pull I know we're going to lose heat, but you got to get some light down here. So I start to do blessings. The first one I do is, I had a woman in my parish who was Native American, and she had experience with uncanny phenomena. So I tell her one day, I was like, hey, I've got some creatures down in the basement that I kind of want to move on. You think you could help out? She's like, oh, what do you got, some raccoons? And I said, no. And she goes, oh, I'm with you. So we go into the office. We do a quick auricular confession to one another, mutual absolution. And then we head on down, all kitted up, got surplices on, candles going down. I just basically have some blessing rites that I'm going to do. And of course, like, wind blows. She's got long hair. Her hair, it's all blown. The candles get blown out. And she's like, what the expletive was that? And I was like, I don't know. But I think that was round one. So at that point, I called the bishop and let him know. And he was not receptive. Even though the rector before me had had a nervous breakdown and marriage came apart. And the interim would not be in the building for very long. And also in his office, filled it with candles. So the bishop was really in kind of denial that something was afoot here. There also I didn't know this at the time, but in the past, there had been some bad behavior by former rectors, like 100+ years ago. Something was hot there. So anyway, I then also find that I have dowsers show up with the rods, and they're following what they're calling ley lines. And I didn't have much understanding of what ley lines were, but I studied up and I talked to the dowsing, the North American Dowsers Association, talked to the president guy. I read a few things. And then also some of the books that were coming out of the UK the Church of England in the last 40 years also include conversations about the, what did they call it? The old lines or the old walkways. There's a special term in the Britain for it. Anyway, so it turns out these dowsers are tracking the lines, and it's like 3 of them that go through the building, at least 3 of them. And then they run right into water. And so apparently I find out that the ley lines are like magnetic meridians that run on the earth. And apparently they kind of run extra uncanny energy. So I talked to the Native Americans in the valley, and they say, yeah, we never lived here. We never settled here. We hunt here. We dance here. We don't live here. It's too hot. But not temperature-wise, just energy-wise. So when the white man came and wanted to live in this area, they said, "Oh yeah, you want this? You go ahead, see what happens." And so come to find out, there were all sorts of, I would be in the chapel in prayer, and these are, 45-minute periods of silent prayer. And at some point, there's the one that sticks out of my mind most often is I'm sitting there, and on my cushions, and I hear this like kicking of the back door. This is the door that's right over top of these hollow stairs. And so I'm like, what? And it's like these kids. So I'm gonna come out there like old man Lanier. And I start running to them, sir, you kids get out of there, So I go in the back, and that door is shaking with kicks. And I'm like, all right. I lock the door and I open the door, and there's nobody there. I'm like, man. I close the door. They start kicking again. I open the door.
See, that's when I'm out, Father. That's when I'm updating my profile on the church deployment.
See, the way I felt at this point was it was a whole ball of wax. Like this was just one aspect of a kind of a toxic environment that this parish was really suffering. And I was like, well, what am I going to do? Like, I signed up for this. This is my jurisdiction. And if I just leave, and they were doing all kind of stuff. They were paying me less than the mandatory minimum, unbeknownst to me, and stuff like this, And so I was like, if I leave here, somebody else they're going to have an interim, and the next person is going to walk right into the same stuff. And the parish will suffer, and the next person is going to come in and just get chewed up.
So there's a dark cloud over this community, a dark cloud. There's a darkness over this building that is now impacting the people who pray there and who serve there.
there's a little bit of urine in the punch.
Okay.
You can't taste it until you've been drinking it for a while. And then you're like, this is a little funny.
Yeah.
So my feeling was like, look, like this is my job. Like the buck stops here. I'm not going to leave this place to chew up somebody else and chew up the people who are here. This is a lovely place. These people are good people. And they do great work. It's just there's a little urine in the punch. So anyway, one of the things that and there's all sort of uncanny stories, but one of the things that I find is that I'm doing a blessing down in the basement, and I set up a shrine, Saint Uriel in the basement for light, and I'm finding that it'll be good for about 3 months, and then things get weird again. And so the two places that are also self-proclaimed psychics keep showing up. They keep going to these two at least one a year is showing up and going to these two places. One at the liturgical north end of the transept, and then one the other place is over the hollow steps. And they keep going. They're like, there's something really strange right here. There's something sad, and or something cold, or something angry. Says like a negative emotional disturbance there. And so come to find out, in those first 2 years I'm down there, I'm looking at the pipes and I'm like, that looks like asbestos. And one of the guys is like, Father, don't look at that. I was like, but that looks like a lot of asbestos. They're like, that's real expensive. Keep walking. And so I gave it a year, and I was all right, fine. But I keep noticing, I start to notice that the two places that are really bad with asbestos is that interrogation room and those hollow steps. So I would go down and bless, and it would hold for a bit, but my conclusion was the natural prophylactic quality of the earth was being compromised. So there was something that needed work. So I was like, forget it. We're abating this asbestos. Let's get it done. And luckily, at roughly the same time, perhaps by coincidence, none of the workers would work on the boilers anymore. No one would work on the organ motor. Therefore, we had to get rid of this asbestos. No one would insulate the bottom because the workers, they shouldn't be down there. So I had all of the right leverage needed. We abated the asbestos, went down, did a blessing. And I got to tell you, after that, we put solar panels on the roof and gave the extra electricity that we didn't need to two different nonprofits that we were supporting, one for battered women, one for the community center next door. We did this with almost a very easy effort. Also, the folks who were really on my ass all of a sudden started to come around and really have a conversion of heart, softened up. The whole place started to soften up, and things all of a sudden got really great. It was vital. It was so lovely. So I like the understanding of the kind of middle wavelengths, because there's some coarse things that you can do, coarse matter things. Abate the asbestos, get that out of there. There are some subtle things you can do. You start blessing, start bringing light in, start pouring in, love, start pouring in kindness, and then also be sure that at the very bottom, or top, depending on which way your wavelengths set up, you are surrendering, that you are engaged in the path of the cross. Because one of the things about ley lines and the uncanny energy that they apparently put out is that they're apparently amplifiers. So when you build a building, and apparently a lot of English churches and cathedrals are built on these lines and crossings. So you build something on there and it becomes like an antenna. So if you've got urine in the punch, you're just spraying the urine punch all over your community. But if you clean the punch up, then it's helping promote kindness, and it's helping promote love. It's helping the gospel actually,
So let's talk about this from a different perspective. I know Father Garland, Father Trey may have a comment as well. I just saw you breathe intently like you had a thing to say. But so I want to go to the ley lines for a moment, because that's new to me. And in the UK, they're everywhere. They just cross all over the UK. Never paid attention until, and friends of St. Timothy's will know Canon Jeremy Hazelock. He was a parish priest for 10 years in a village, a parish called Boxgrove Priory, an old Benedictine priory. And he said the same story, Father Justin. He would have people come with dowsing rods to come and to go into the church. And because this was an old Benedictine priory, there were monks buried under the nave. And he had I can't remember, some sort of necessary renovation or excavation that was going on, where they were going and they had to move around where these monks were buried. He knew where they were, and he also knew where the heads were. So when the people came into the parish with their dowsing rods, he was like, fine, come in. And he said, but they would go to the exact spot where the monks were buried. And then he would ask them, and they didn't know how monks were to be buried in a church. He would ask them if they knew where the head was, where the feet were, and they would get it right every single time. And he's coming in as someone who is not easily excited about these kinds of things, but he's like, I don't know what you do with that, but they were right every single time. So there was something about, and I think to give this into a bigger theological picture, is that there is a created natural order where the glory of God is expressed. And whenever I think, and the reason I was curious about your story, and I'm glad you told it, is because often in terms of parochial life, we will have that kind of cloud, that darkness, that space where you walk in and you can feel it. And whatever is in there may be decades old, and we don't know what happens, but you come in and you now take on some of that darkness, and you have that kind of depressed state as well. But there's a created order, and if we begin to promote disharmony in what was intended to be harmonious, then things are out of kilter. I don't know if we're saying it is like every funny horror movie, Ghostbusters, whatever else. If you find the wrong portal to the afterworld and you crack open the door, then the whole place is haunted. I don't think that's what you're saying, but we are talking about the harmony of creation and our role with that. Father Trey, what do you think? Any comment on that?
Let me go back to something that Father Justin was saying, and it's really important, I think, to emphasize this, that the movies can scare people, but if you do your Christian best and you are in daily prayer, you're in Bible study, you're going to Mass, you don't have anything to worry about. It really becomes about intention. And Father Justin, did you ever find out what was the precipitating action to cause all this? Somehow someone had intention to do it. I'm just curious to know if you ever found out what it was.
So there were a few things. One, there was a rector who I think raped his kid's nanny in the rectory that was right next door on one of these lines. Also, there used to be, it was Vermont, so there used to be a firing range for small arms, a gun range in the basement. Not that there's any, not that the firing range itself is peculiar, but I do know the guys, it didn't do good things to those guys, and I can't imagine it did good things for the creatures that lived in harmony down there. I think one of the most precipitating issues is that the asbestos in relation to the lines. My sense was that there's something also flowing down the line from further up. But I don't know of any kind of intentional pack or intentional contract for something in that space.
Or it could have been, yeah, or it could have been someone else intentionally did it to that space, and some sort of black magic deal to catch someone there.
Sure.
For me, I think, Father Steve, you hit the nail on the head, is that there are there's this natural order of things, and God has given us the ability to discern right and wrong. And it's when we catch these little glimpses of things of, oh, you can manifest this in your life, and we take off to it. We get attracted to things that then open up doors to things that we really don't want to open up the doors to. And if we live as Christ commands us, and we have no other gods but the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and not money, not anything else, we're going to keep all those doors closed. And so if we follow the natural order that God has given us, we're okay. It's when we deviate from that. Bishop Martins preached last year a great sermon at St. Paul's, and he talked about how you keep taking a little bite of sin. It doesn't seem like much until you get to the end of your days, and it's a huge amount. Same thing when kind of playing with these forces. We see all these things, all this New Age stuff that keeps coming up everywhere, trying to say, oh, well, you can be Christian and do this. No, you really can't. You're opening up stuff you shouldn't be doing. And this is one of the reasons why at least from the training I've had and from the priests that I work with, it's just critical that you keep your devotions going, you keep your prayers going, and keep focused on whatever God has in store for you, and not try to deviate from that.
So let me do this, and then let's spend the remaining 5 or 6 minutes answering some questions in the chat. So while I make this comment, if you are chomping at the bit to type something in the chat, go ahead and do it now. I think that, and fathers, would you agree with this, that the most impact or the most contact that we might have with the things in our topic today would be more like what you experienced in Vermont, say it sort of, place memory or whatever it is, where it's not Linda Blair with her head spinning, is the point I want to make, or Emily Rose or whatever else necessarily. It's much more subtle than that, and more pervasive, and it sort of seeps into the sort of the spiritual water table, where things have been, either there is a trauma, there is some awful activity, there is a door to the forces of darkness that come into play, and then we find ourselves kind of just, at least in my experience, people just are sort of infected with it. And then we do, as you both, I think, have said, the sort of the immediate responses, simple blessings, prayers that we are allowed to do ourselves, or house blessings, or things. There's an interesting book by a priest in the Church of Wales. His name is Father Jason Bray, and he is the exorcist for the church in Wales. And he has this wonderful, very, very good read about these kinds of experiences, uncanny phenomenon. And his response is, and it almost always works the first time, is to do a house blessing, is to take whatever is disharmonious, whatever is dark, whatever is not right, and to bring it to the light of Jesus Christ in his name, and to reorient everything toward that beatific vision, united with the cross, is what takes something that's spinning out of control and maybe reorients it to the right place. So if people are, if they're walking and there's a cloud over them, or they feel like there's a cloud in their place of business or in their home or in any other aspect of their life, what advice would you have for them? And then we'll go to the questions.
For me, it would be to hand it over to Christ, and be faithful in your prayers, and to not seek it out, not don't give it an opportunity. Just be faithful and ask God to kind of to bless it, or ask a priest to bless your house. And if that doesn't work, seek the counsel of your priest, and then go from there. The thing is, I guess it's difficult to give you a firm answer on that, Father Steve, because we're taught to take it case by case, and cases are managed pretty closely to examine the person's fitness, the person's mental fitness, drug, alcohol, any type else. No one is more skeptical about this than the church. And then when the church sees it's proven, it's either preternatural or an uncanny phenomenon, then the church will typically intervene. But the easiest thing you can do is to be faithful to your devotions and to bless the house.
Yeah, I think so one of the things that occurred when I invited the head of the Dowsers Committee, who does work on he does all kind of work on these ley lines and farms and whatnot. I had him, kind of do a little observation, little recon of the parish, and he came back and he was like, "My God, like, how are you living here? How are you working here?" And I said, just straightforward, I was like, "Well, I mean, I'm a contemplative, so I'm putting in an hour or two of silent prayer every day. I'm saying the daily office, and I work the rosary. I got the Jesus prayer ready to go at hand. My life is oriented to God, and I do everything I can just because that is that is what we're created for. Like, I do everything I can to keep my life oriented to the divine reality." So he was just shaking his head. He goes, there's so much going on here.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that also is a helpful point, that a lot of this stuff you just cut right through and it falls to the wayside as affecting one's person, unless someone compromises themselves. I think the same thing goes oftentimes for a church. Like, our church was compromised, whether by the asbestos or by some bad actors, but the church itself was compromised, and so there has to be a healing involved. I think just regularly go to mass, go to confession, regularly be at your prayers, regularly be surrendering your heart to God as just a habit of being. I think that's that's like one of the safest, and actually like the most life-giving things. So like, life just flows out of there. It burns up, oftentimes, in my experience, it burns up at least the mouth factors involved. And then sometimes, case by case, if something needs special attention, bring special attention to it.
Indeed. I never gave any thought to ghosts or uncanny phenomenon until honestly 2.5, 3 years ago, where I always thought, listen, you have demons, it's biblical, it's in the church's theology, and any kind of paranormal activity I attributed to demonic activity. There was no place in my theology for people who have died but were still hanging around. I didn't understand it, and there was no clear theological place for them to fit. And that's just kind of where it was for me. Two things have happened though since then. And so what happened was, in this parish church, so many people have heard things, felt things, not so much seen things, but voices, touches, and many of those people are on this Zoom tonight from this parish, perhaps because they want to know what in the world did they hear or experience. And then, but just to your point, Father Justin, when we were doing the renovation during COVID of this parish church, one of the subcontractors working on drywall came up to me. I'm in a cassock walking through every day, as I did during COVID. What else was I going to do? And he came up and he says, "Are you a open-minded priest or a closed-minded priest?" And I said, "Well, that absolutely depends on what you're talking about." And he says, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And I said, "Why do you ask?" He says, "This place is crawling with them." And I thought that's an interesting thing for him to say on top of everything else. But then I also discovered there's actually a fair amount of literature, not tons, but there's some serious literature in the Roman Catholic Church, Jesuits mainly, I think, talking about paranormal activity, but also in the Anglican world, there are some sources in the past 150 years on this subject matter, which I wasn't aware of. For me now, I still don't know how all this fits, other that when you read the church fathers, there's all kinds of hierarchy and things that are unseen that we just simply say that's beyond our full knowledge, but not beyond our experience, perhaps, because we do experience. So again, to what you've said and Father Trey has said, to say your prayers, to go to mass, to make your confession, to live in joy, all the things to push back all that darkness that can infect, that does fit in our theology. And so the things that don't seem to have a neat category, which I love to have, the same remedy applies to those as to the ones that do fit in a neat category. The sacraments, the sacramentals, the response of faith. Okay, questions really quick. Here's from Tanya. She is wondering what your thoughts are on people claiming to be, quote, ghosts of particular people who have passed away. For example, I keep seeing the ghost of great Aunt Martha in the yard. I think Tanya's making that as a theoretical, that she's not actually seeing her great Aunt Martha in the yard, etc. She says, "I assumed if one was a Christian, you would go to heaven, or not. So why would a person still be floating around?" Which is sort of something I just hinted at. What do y'all think on that? Trey? Father Trey?
I think it's certainly possible. And
what is possible? To be floating around, or that
it's possible that the person is having some sort of experience of a preternatural manifestation. Yes. What is it? I don't know. One of the best things that it was somewhat discussed in Rome, and one of the professors basically said, "Look, you say go be with Jesus, and send them on their way, and ignore it." And again, if great Aunt Martha keeps appearing in the yard, call the priest, do a house blessing, and it's kind of one of the, at least looking at it on the demonic point of view. Any type of preternatural manifestation, this kind of buildings and pets are not uncommon, and so it's in the Roman ritual to deal with both those things, and so it's dealt with. And if you can't, as a Christian, pray that they go and tell them to go be with God, call a priest.
So one of the questions was, are all preternatural things considered evil?
They are not, the only benign, yes, preternatural is going to be benign to malicious. Supernatural is going to be the angels and the saints operating, and the grace of God operating.
One of the things that when I hear about the Aunt Martha in the garden, is also recognition that some places will like replay a memory, like a
place memory,
like a place. So it's like, for instance, in my old parish, many people would see this old dude who would walk and sit down in the pew. But that wasn't necessarily an unquiet dead.
More like an echo, right?
More like an echo.
Yeah.
And if need be, a simple kind of antiseptic blessing, some Kyrie work. And then sometimes maybe if you can identify the person, or if you can't, a simple requiem helps just kind of heal it up. Just helps seal it up, especially if it is an unquiet dead, or someone who's kind of maybe doesn't even recognize they're dead, or for whatever reason has a really confused departure. And I feel like this, I don't have any data other than my own experience, but a lot of folks dying under the influence of morphine at the end of their lives, some folks who are not necessarily properly disposed and oriented have maybe a confusing time. And so sometimes, even this is also why I think last rites are so important and so helpful, even if the person has physically expired, just to be in the room to help them orient themselves to God, to reorient back to the source of all being, back to just like let Jesus come by with the bus. Jesus opens the door, says, "Hey, let's go for a ride. You might have to do your homework on the way, but don't sweat it. I'm driving." And I think that could be really, especially with phenomena like that, I think that could be such a really a joyous occasion for the family and for the departed. Yeah.
Becky McLean, what did your physician say? He would say that it can't hurt. It might help, but it sure is a crowd pleaser. Is that right? So, if you've got those things, those kinds of prayers may very well help, can't hurt. And, who knows, it could also be a crowd pleaser. Yeah. Do you both share my kind of thought, is that I really have no idea, maybe I'm the only one, where all of this fits? I have more questions than any kind of firm answers, yet I just trust in the grace of Christ and the power of prayer and what we're called to do, and then that will sort itself out.
I struggle with, what do you do with ghosts? Where do you put them in the natural order of things? Because it's not, as you already said, it's not in our theology. And I find it difficult to believe. There's no mention of it within the New Testament. I find it difficult to believe that ghosts exist simply because at some point they have to go on to judgment. Now, I have...
Meaning that when you die, there is a particular judgment, and there is no... Yeah.
The way I've taught it is, and let me be the first to say, I don't know. I've never had anyone come back after I've done their funeral and tell me. But when you die, you're loosed from your physical bonds and the laws of physics, therefore the laws of time. And I kind of think everyone kind of fast forwards to the judgment spot, and off you go and find out, where you are, because you're kind of in the eschaton at that point. What do you do with ghosts? I don't really know. I am not, I have had more practical training by pre-Vatican II priests that would simply say you dispense them to go be with God and leave it there.
Yeah.
And just don't worry about it. And this is, once again, this is where people get into trouble. It's, break out the Ouija boards. Don't do that.
Yep.
Bad news. So you kind of just ignore it and go on. But there's always someone's firm intention, either at Father Justin's previous church or wherever, someone's intention started the mess. And you have to figure out, you just got to kind of counteract it and go on with life.
Yeah.
There's something about one of the reasons I like the wavelength register as a helpful framework. So, in the contemplative tradition, the kind of far end is non-conceptual. In this way, you're not even engaging in God's qualities. You are entering into divine darkness. You're you're entering into into that which is beyond perception. Okay. So in this way, it's a non-conceptual register. It's not using concepts, symbols. It's not using words, images. In a certain way, it's or Dennis the Areopagite will have it supermentum cognizance, like cognizance beyond the mind. But on the course end, you have that mental physical, which is very easily boxable. But in that middle wavelength, the middle wavelength is all over the place. Like if you think of any of the like imaginale mystics, like who's the German Lutheran? Jakob Bohm. Okay. Like his theology has got a lot of this middle wavelength. It's all over the place. Do you know what I mean? It's so idiosyncratic. And if you've ever done any study, I'd say for instance, like Buddhism, like Japanese Zen, very just at the edge of the conceptual stuff. But if you look at Tibetan Buddhism, they have schools at all sorts of different registers. So they have this middle wavelength, and there's like 100 ways, very idiosyncratic ways in experiencing and engaging in this, I would say, in this this wavelength that is not really germane to our conceptual processing. So it's really like it's a real can of worms, because it's like all over the place. But if you look, there's still so much, like Tibetan Buddhists have exorcist practices. Not everyone does it. Some just focus on this school, some this school, and they're all over the map. So it seems to me that the middle wavelength in which this kind of uncanny phenomena is encountered for us, it seems like a really messy, colorful, very idiosyncratic kind of piece. And where I think the church is so helpful is the church gives us some really basic guidelines, where Father Terry put it out. It's so straightforwardly. Some people are going to, there's so many different ways to experience this kind of phenomena, but the guidelines are pretty straightforward. Like, keep your orientation not on the phenomena. Offer love from God. Keep your eyes on our Lord. So if you ask Our Lady for some prayers, the guidelines are help us kind of gain some stability in a really like dreamscape kind of phenomena. Father Terry, does that make some sense?
It does. And I think the other thing is that in this confusion of in the messiness of wavelengths, if you'll accept that as a term, you also have to be open to the grace of God is going to somehow, or the saints will manifest in ways that are considered uncanny phenomena. And so just because you have something happen, and I had a really almost miraculous event with the family when one of their loved ones died. And so you have to allow that in this, that if it doesn't fit in with what Christ has taught us and the precepts of Mother Church, then you probably shouldn't do it. But that doesn't mean that God isn't going to operate, or the saints or the angels aren't going to operate in a way that goes beyond our understanding.
Okay, it's 8:17, and Sunday Night Football begins in like 6 minutes. So let me do two things. Let me thank both of you, and then I'm gonna ask one final question, and I'm gonna piggyback off Jeff Bradburn's question in the chat. So Father Justin, Father Trey, thank you so very, very much for this time. We didn't even get to half the questions, and I only had 4 written down that we were going to talk about. Hopefully we can do something like this again, and maybe soon. So Jeff was asking, so to confirm, we shouldn't watch The Exorcist with our children or at all. Well, I would say it depends on how old your children are. If your children are 28 and 36, and you maybe want to talk about what is good and bad with this, that may be a place for that, which we'll get into. If they're 4 and 7, I would say no, don't watch The Exorcist with them at all. I think we've all said be mindful of gateways, of points of departure to things that move us away from God. The whole Christian life, the whole moral life is oriented to bringing us closer to our intended end, which is the vision of God, of beatitude. And so all of the moral life is to either make decisions that bring us closer to that or take us further away. And sometimes those choices, that might move us further away. Father Trey, you're dying to say something before I move on.
We literally had an entire session to exorcisms in movies, and
that's my final question. But go ahead.
It's all mostly horribly wrong, and there are 3 main points. And the first point is it's done as a team. You usually have 1 or 2 priests. You have lay people on the side praying. It is not just the priest and the possessed.
Psychiatrists, medical doctors, the whole bit, right? Yes.
Yep. The second thing is they always bring in this dark, heavy music, foreboding music, and it's not. It is, you are there representing the church. The angels and the saints are present. It is a great thing that you're delivering somebody from this possession. It is not this heavy, dark thing. It may be rough. It may take several times. An exorcism can last up to, at least I've heard, 2 years being the longest, of meeting with the people, praying, and doing the rites. But it's not a heavy, dark thing. Anxiety ridden, certainly, but you are there to liberate this person from being possessed. So it's this great and glorious gift that God has given his church to be able to set them free from this possession. And finally, I will say that the human body, when there is a preternatural manifestation of the possessed, can do pretty damn bizarre things. And I will simply leave it there.
So with that being said, is there a movie or some media presentation of evil, the demonic ghosts, of what we've talked about, that is the best, at least that has the fewest amount of errors in it? They all are not, textbooks on how it should be done or what it's like, but is there one that when you watch, you say, okay, that's the least bad of all of them?
No.
Okay.
One of the things that I don't recommend horror or exorcism movies at all. I would say I would not show my kid any adult, because there's something about one being like have this like super effective multimedia input to scare you, which already is a bit of a strange compromise of your immune system and the way your body is to function. And then it also is inputting a kind of a paradigm that is almost always utterly false. It's a paradigm that is, it's just not, it's so false that it's not, I would say it's just not good for us to do this. Like, there is a reason for us to have adrenaline dumps when we need them. And like watching a movie is a terrible, especially a horror movie or a movie on exorcism, is a horrible way to do pseudo entertainment through a kind of a manipulation of your adrenal system. So I would say don't watch any of them. I mean, if you like, I would say watch Ghostbusters, I think, because it's so funny.
Yeah, don't use this for your adrenaline dump. I think is a great thing. If you can take it and understand it's fiction, it has absolutely no or very limited basis in reality, go for it. But you can find other things to do to get that entertainment in life.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so very much. And we had 35, I think, is the most at one time, which is larger than the average Episcopal church. So if we were to do a parochial report, we would be in the top, 95th percentile of congregations. So thank you very much, and thank you all to joining us. And stay tuned for more offerings like this.